We've just got more evidence that the middle class is being systematically destroyed in America. At this point, millions of people out there have already grown accustomed to barely scraping by from month to month. But that is not what being middle class is supposed to be about. Middle class families should be able to make more money than they have to spend on just everyday necessities, because that way they can build long-term wealth. Unfortunately, income growth has not kept up with the pace of the rising cost of living, and millions of households have taken massive amounts of debt. At the same time, the labor market doesn't offer good paying jobs that support middle-class life, and the lack of these positions has been contributing to the decline of this income group all across the country. In the early 1970s, the middle class accounted for about 60% of the population. But now, middle-income households are rapidly becoming a minority in the United States, and as economic conditions continue to deteriorate, millions of hard-working families all over America are being stretched financially like never before. Today, we've compiled a series of new numbers that expose the rapid downfall of the U.S. middle class. But before checking this list, please support us by leaving a thumbs up in this video and subscribing to our channel so you don't miss our future lists. Without further ado, here are 20 shocking signs of the staggering decline of the American middle-class family. 1. The Pew Research Center defines middle-class households as making 2/3 to double America's median income, which adds up to an income range of about $45,700 to $100,000 for single Americans in 2021 dollars. Now, according to a Northwestern Mutual study, 68% of American adults consider themselves part of the middle class, but as of 2021, just about 51% were actually in the middle class. 2. From 1971 to 2016, the size of middle-class America has decreased by nearly 8%, according to a separate study released by the Pew Research Center. On top of that, from 2010 to 2016, the wealth of people in the middle class didn't increase at the same rate as the wealth of the people in the upper class, widening the income gap between the two groups. 3. Recent data from the Census Bureau's current population survey indicates that the share of adults living in a middle-class household shrank from 61% in 1971 to 51% in 2021, marking a 10% drop in the past 50 years. The analyst highlighted the widening of the income gap and the shrinking of the middle class has led to a steady decrease in the share of U.S. aggregate income held by middle-class households. 4. Incomes across all income levels have risen over the past 5 decades, but that hasn't happened in an evenly distributed manner. According to Pew, upper-income 3-person households saw their incomes grow by 70% from 1970 to 2020. By contrast, middle-class households saw just a 49% growth in their incomes during that time. 5. Fed data shows that the middle class is the group that produces roughly 50% of the country's wealth. However, middle-class families only held 27.6% of all household wealth in the last quarter of 2021. Now that's about $39.25 trillion. For comparison, the lower-income quintile has just 2.6% of all wealth, and the top 1% holds about 1/3 of the country's wealth. 6. The American middle class is burdened with a whole lot of debt, and the debt load continues to grow larger with each passing year. At the end of 2021, middle-class households had $1.58 trillion in consumer debt, according to Fed data. That's a $100 billion surge from the year prior. They also took on about $300 billion more in home mortgages last year. 7. Like many Americans, the middle class is grappling with the burden of student debt. As of 2020, middle-class Americans held a median of $28,000 in education installment loans, as reported by the Fed. 8. The U.S.'s shrinking middle class pales in comparison to other countries' middle classes. According to a 2020 analysis from the OECD, the U.S. middle class is the smallest amongst fellow developed nations. Across OECD countries, about 61% of the population is generally middle class, but the U.S.'s share came in at just 51% at the time of the OECD's analysis. In Canada, for example, 58% of the population is considered middle income compared to the U.S. 9. As the middle class declines, each new generation has been less likely to join it. For baby boomers, the share of the U.S. population for people who were in their 20s and who were considered in middle-income households was 60%. Now that's a quite higher share than the following Generation X and Millennial generations at 54% and just 53% respectively. The middle-income class has grown smaller with each successive generation, the OECD wrote, based on those who were in middle-class households when aged 20 to 30. 10. According to a new Gallup survey, 56% of middle-class Americans report that rising prices are causing them financial hardship. Middle-class Americans are also more likely to name inflation as the nation's top problem, at a 44% rate compared to 32% for lower income and 19% for upper income households. 11. Debt growth has been especially strong among middle-class families. From June 2010 to June 2020, debt grew by 58.9% among families with incomes between $47,000 and $154,000. 12. At the end of 2021, there were about 411,000 fewer homes on the market that were affordable for households earning between $75,000 and $100,000 than before the health crisis. To put that in perspective, at the end of 2019, there was one affordable listing for every 24 households in the middle income bracket, and it was 1 out of 65 by December 2021. For middle-income prospective homeowners, the competition is still fierce, as the share of listings affordable to buyers within this range dropped from 62% in 2019 to 51% now. 13. Since 1989, the value of real estate wealth owned by the top 1% has grown by 772%, while the value of properties owned by middle-class families has grown by 359%, according to data from the Federal Reserve. The middle-income percentile had the slowest rate of growth of any on record, surpassed even by lower-income households. 14. As the cost of living continues to skyrocket and labor conditions continue to deteriorate, the latest data released by Third Way shows that 62% of job openings are for positions that don't pay enough for a household with children to meet the definition of middle class. 15. Middle-class Americans are saving way less money in the past few years. According to data compiled by Value Penguin, only 21% of middle-class households have more than $20,000 in savings. 16. On top of that, middle-class households in America have fewer financial assets. A new analysis released by NERS found that across generations, middle-class households own few financial assets, and the median amounts held fall far short of the assets needed to fund a secure retirement. In 2021, middle-class millennials owned only 14% of their generation's financial assets, The numbers are even worse for middle-class Generation Xers and baby boomers, which owned 8% and 6% respectively of their generation's financial assets. In America, the middle class can no longer afford retirement. Middle-class Americans face sharp economic inequality, with ownership of financial assets highly concentrated among the wealthy, explained Tyler Bond, Nurse Research Manager. Now that we have a retirement system largely built around the individual ownership of financial assets in 401k accounts, middle-class Americans are struggling to accumulate sufficient financial assets during their working years. This means the retirement outlook for many in the middle class is bleak at best. 17. And even though millennials hold more assets than other groups, the research also shows that for middle-class millennial households, the median financial assets total only $7,800. 18. Medical bankruptcy is silently killing the American middle class. A new study has found that a horrifying 530,000 families turn to bankruptcy each year due to medical bills they can't pay. For middle-class Americans, health insurance offers little protection. Most of us have policies with so many loopholes, co-payments, and deductibles that illness can put you in the poorhouse, highlighted Dr. David U. Himmelstein in a press release for the physicians for the National Health Program. Unless you're Bill Gates, you're just one serious illness away from bankruptcy, he warned. 19. The middle class is also more likely to have credit card debt than lower and upper income households. Among Americans in the middle income quintile, 56.8% currently have credit card debt, with an average burden of $9,780, according to Motley Fool's data. And finally, 20. According to a 2017 Harvard Housing Report, over 38 million middle-income American households can't afford their housing, an increase of 146% in a span of 16 years. Today, that number is projected to be in the range of 54 million, and as interest rates continue to soar, that figure will continue to climb in the months ahead. Since the onset of the health crisis, the U.S. economy has been decaying at an alarming pace. Over the past 2 years, the middle class has gotten smaller and smaller in this country, and now it seems that another economic downturn is upon us once again. So many families are already living on the edge right now. Recent surveys have exposed that well over 50% of the population is living paycheck to paycheck, and that most Americans do not have emergency savings or any financial cushion to fall back on. When you are living on the edge, there's always a danger that you could fall over. Since 2020, we have never seen so many middle-class Americans falling straight into poverty. In other words, unless dramatic changes happen in America, the middle class is going to be absolutely eviscerated in the next decade. We must wake up now. The middle class is dying right before our eyes, and if we want to save it, we must take action now.